Emma's first day at the Langford estate began with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The sprawling mansion loomed ahead, its stone facade swallowed by creeping ivy and shadowed by towering oaks. As she stepped through the heavy iron gate, the weight of her new role settled on her shoulders, not just as a nanny, but as a stranger stepping into a world shrouded in secrets. Victor Langford, the man who owned this vast estate, was an enigma whispered about in the town's hushed conversations. Reclusive and formidable, the tycoon rarely appeared in public, and his name was often paired with rumors of hidden scandals and a past no one dared to unravel. Emma had accepted the job partly for the steady income, but mostly because she needed distance from the life she'd known and, perhaps, a chance to uncover something buried beneath the surface. The housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, greeted Emma with a polite but guarded smile and led her through the grand entrance hall. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dust, mingled with something floral and faintly metallic. Emma's footsteps echoed softly as she was shown to the nursery where the children played, their laughter a brief reprieve from the mansion's oppressive silence. After settling the children with their toys, Emma decided to explore the estate's library, a room said to hold the family's deepest secrets amidst towering shelves of leather-bound volumes. The library was vast and dimly lit, with a heavy oak desk that looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. As she dusted the cluttered shelves and rearranged scattered books, Emma's fingers brushed against something unusual, a small drawer tucked beneath the desk's surface, its edges worn and hidden from casual notice. Curiosity quickened her pulse as she pulled the drawer open, revealing an envelope yellowed with age and sealed with crimson wax. The handwriting on the front was elegant but unfamiliar, addressed simply, to Mrs. Langford. Her breath caught. The letter was addressed to her mother. Emma's mind raced. Her mother had never spoken of the Langfords, always evading questions about her past with a tight smile and swift change of subject. For years, Emma had sensed there was something unspoken, a shadow trailing their family name whenever it was mentioned. Now, here was a tangible piece of that silence, tucked away in a drawer no one else seemed to know existed. She hesitated, fingers trembling as she broke the seal. The paper inside was brittle, the ink faded but still legible. She quickly skimmed the opening lines, which spoke of regret and apology, and a plea for understanding. The letter hinted at a relationship kept secret, a bond that had been severed to protect those involved. Emma's heart pounded. Was this the key to the mystery that had shadowed her family for so long? Torn between the desire to know and the fear of what the truth might bring, Emma carefully refolded the letter and slipped it into her coat pocket. She was not ready to confront her mother or anyone else with it yet. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur as she performed her duties, the letter's weight heavy in her thoughts. Later, as twilight seeped through the tall windows and the estate began to settle into silence, Emma found herself drawn back to the library. Alone, she sat at the oak desk, the letter now a silent companion resting on the polished surface. The house around her seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the secrets to be uncovered. Emma's mind replayed every fragment of conversation she'd ever had with her mother about the past, each evasive answer, every glance that lingered too long. Now, those moments took on new meaning. The letter was a tangible link to a story untold, a story that might redefine everything Emma thought she knew about herself and her family. She glanced up at the towering shelves, wondering what other secrets the Langford estate might conceal. The mansion was more than just stone and wood, it was a vessel of hidden histories and silent regrets. Emma's role as nanny had become something more than a job, it was an unexpected invitation into a world she was only beginning to understand. As night deepened, Emma finally stood, the letter safely tucked away. Tomorrow, she thought, she would need to decide whether to confront the past or keep its shadows at bay. But for now, the mystery of the sealed letter lingered, a quiet promise that the Langford estate held stories waiting to be told, and that Emma was somehow at the heart of them. The days that followed Emma's discovery of the letter were a strange blend of routine and restless curiosity. She settled into the rhythms of her work with the Langford children, their laughter and demands a welcome distraction. But beneath it all, the weight of the letter pressed on her thoughts like an unspoken question waiting to be answered. Each morning, as she prepared breakfast or tidied the nursery, her mind drifted to the elusive Victor Langford, the man who was more myth than man in the town's whispered stories. Victor's name stirred a mixture of awe and suspicion wherever it was mentioned. The townspeople spoke of him in hushed tones, some with admiration, others with barely concealed resentment. A reclusive tycoon, his fortune was vast and his privacy fiercely guarded. Rumors swirled around him like the mist that clung to the estate's grounds, whispers of a hidden wife, a scandal long buried, and a past that refused to remain silent. Emma couldn't help but wonder how much of that past was connected to the letter she had found. Her mother's silence on the subject suddenly seemed less like omission and more like protection. But what had her mother been protecting? And from whom? One afternoon, while organizing the children's playroom, Emma overheard a conversation between Mrs. Collins and another member of the household staff. The mention of Victor's secret past was cautious, almost conspiratorial. "No one's seen Mrs. Langford in years," Mrs. Collins whispered. "Some say Victor had to keep her hidden for the family's sake. But the truth, no one really knows." Emma's heart quickened. The pieces of the puzzle felt closer, yet the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. She knew the risks of prying too deeply. Victor was a man who valued control and discretion above all. But the mystery called to her, a siren song she couldn't ignore. At night, when the house grew silent and the children were asleep, Emma would sit by the window in her small quarters, the letter folded neatly beside her. She reread the words, searching for clues, for a hint of the life her mother had left behind. The letter spoke of love and sacrifice, of choices made to shield others from pain. It was a confession wrapped in regret, penned by a man who seemed burdened by the past. Emma's relationship with her mother had always been guarded, shaped by unspoken tensions and half-truths. Now, the letter cast their silence in a new light. Her mother's refusal to discuss the Langford name suddenly felt like a shield, protecting Emma from a truth too complex and painful to share. The estate itself seemed to embody these contradictions. Its grandeur was matched by an air of secrecy, its halls echoing with stories untold. Emma noticed the subtle ways Victor's presence permeated the household, a locked study, portraits that seemed to watch her, and staff who spoke of him with a mixture of reverence and fear. One evening, as Emma prepared the children for bed, she found herself wondering what Victor was really like. Was he the cold, distant figure the rumors suggested, or was there something more beneath his guarded exterior? The letter hinted at a man capable of deep feeling, yet one who had chosen to vanish from his family's life. The idea that Victor might have a hidden wife was a shock Emma struggled to process. It was a secret that could unravel everything she thought she knew about her mother and about herself. If her mother had been part of Victor's world, why had she been kept at arm's length? And why had Victor disappeared? Emma's curiosity grew alongside a gnawing sense of unease. The letter's existence raised the stakes, not just for her job, but for the fragile ties that bound her family together. Uncovering the truth could mend old wounds or shatter the delicate peace they had all maintained. Despite her fears, Emma felt a strange determination taking root. She was no longer just a nanny or a passive observer. She was becoming a participant in a story much larger than herself. The letter was a key, and she held it tightly, even as the door it might unlock remained stubbornly closed. As the days passed, Emma noticed subtle shifts in the household. Victor's name was spoken less often, and when it was with a cautious reverence that spoke of unspoken boundaries. The staff moved with practiced discretion, their loyalties divided between the master of the house and the secrets they guarded. Emma's own place in this world felt increasingly precarious. She was an outsider, yet the letter tied her inextricably to the Langford legacy. The tension between her duties and her desire to uncover the truth grew with each passing day. One afternoon, while walking through the estate's sprawling gardens, Emma caught sight of a figure in the distance, Victor Langford himself, standing by the edge of a fountain, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was taller than she had imagined, with a presence that commanded attention even in silence. For a moment, their eyes met, and Emma felt a flicker of recognition, as if he too sensed the weight of the past hovering between them. She quickly looked away, heart pounding. That brief encounter only deepened her resolve. Victor Langford was no mere employer. He was a man entwined with her family's hidden history, a history she was determined to unravel. Back in her quarters that evening, Emma carefully placed the letter on her bedside table. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a bridge to the past, a challenge to confront the silence that had shaped her life. She knew that in time, she would have to face Victor himself, to ask the questions that had haunted her since the moment she found the letter. But for now she waited, caught between the safety of ignorance and the perilous promise of truth. The Langford estate was a place of secrets, and Emma was beginning to understand that some secrets demanded to be uncovered, no matter the cost. That evening, after the children were tucked in and the house had fallen into a quiet hush, Emma found herself alone in the vast, dimly lit study. The letter sat on the heavy oak desk before her, its edges worn from the many times she had unfolded and refolded it. The questions that had haunted her for days now demanded answers, and the only person who could provide them was sitting somewhere in the very house she served. Summoning a courage she hadn't known she possessed, Emma resolved to confront Victor Langford. She knew it was a risk. He was a man reputed to guard his privacy fiercely, and the rumors of his temper were whispered with a mixture of fear and respect. But the mystery of the letter, and the shadow it cast over her mother's past, had become unbearable. She found him in the drawing room, standing by the tall windows looking out over the moonlit grounds. His silhouette was sharp against the night sky, a figure carved from shadows and silence. The moment their eyes met, Emma felt the weight of unspoken history between them. "Mr. Langford," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I found this letter in the library. It's addressed to my mother." She hesitated, then added, "I need to understand what it means." Victor's gaze did not waver. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in time, the quiet tension thick enough to touch. Then, slowly, he nodded and gestured for her to sit. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but edged with a weariness that betrayed years of hidden pain. "Yes," he admitted. "The letter is mine. I wrote it many years ago." He paused, searching her face as if weighing how much to reveal. "Your mother was my wife, secretly, and for a time that was both beautiful and tragic." Emma's breath caught. The rumors, the silence, the letter, all of it was true. But why had it been kept hidden? Why had her mother never spoken of this? Victor continued, his words measured and deliberate. "Our marriage was a union of love, but also burdened by circumstances neither of us could control. The world we lived in demanded secrecy. For your mother's safety, and for yours, I chose to step away. To vanish." He reached into his coat and produced a small, worn photograph, faded but unmistakable. It showed a younger Victor and a woman whose face bore a strong resemblance to Emma's mother, their smiles hesitant but genuine. "This was a time when we believed we could have a life together," he said softly. "But the forces against us were too great." Emma felt a swirl of emotions, shock, grief, a fragile hope. The man before her was no longer just the distant employer. He was a man shaped by sacrifice and love, one who had carried the weight of their shared past alone. "The letter was my attempt to explain, to apologize for the silence and the absence," Victor said. "I hoped one day you would understand why I had to leave, why I could not be there." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. The questions she had harbored for so long found answers, but the truth was bittersweet. The love that had once bound her parents was real, yet fractured by the harsh realities of their lives. Victor's expression softened. "I do not expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that my absence was never a choice made lightly. Your mother's protection was my priority." Emma nodded, the weight of years lifting slightly from her shoulders. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. "For trusting me with this." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You have a right to know. It is your story as much as mine." As the night deepened, they spoke quietly of the past, the joys and sorrows, the hopes that had been dashed, and the sacrifices made in silence. Emma felt a connection form, fragile but real, bridging the gap that years of secrecy had created. When she finally left the study, the letter still clutched in her hand, Emma knew that the story of her family was no longer shrouded in mystery. The truth was out, raw and honest, and it changed everything. But it also offered a path forward, one where secrets could be faced and wounds might begin to heal. The morning after her conversation with Victor, Emma found herself standing in her mother's modest kitchen, the letter clenched tightly in her hand. The familiar scent of brewing coffee and worn wood filled the room, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Langford estate. Her mother looked up from the stove, surprise flickering in her eyes as she noticed the letter. "I found this," Emma said quietly, placing it on the table between them. "Victor told me everything last night, the secret marriage, why he left. I need to hear it from you." Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the letter, fingers tracing the faded handwriting. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, her mother began to speak. "It was a different time," she said, her voice wavering but steady. "A time when love was complicated by expectations, by family pressures, and the fear of scandal. Victor and we loved each other deeply. But the world wasn't kind to people like us." Emma listened as her mother shared memories she had never dared to voice before, the stolen moments, the whispered promises, and the painful choice to part ways for the sake of safety and reputation. She spoke of sacrifices made quietly, of a life lived in shadows to protect the daughter who now sat before her. "There were threats," her mother admitted. "Things I never told you because I wanted to shield you. Victor's departure wasn't abandonment, it was survival. For all of us." Tears blurred Emma's vision as she reached across the table, taking her mother's hands in hers. The silence between them shifted, no longer a barrier but a bridge. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of fear and silence, now lay bare, painful but healing. In the days that followed, the three of them, Emma, her mother, and Victor, began a tentative dialogue, slowly unraveling the tangled history that had kept them apart. Meetings were cautious at first, held in quiet rooms where old wounds could be acknowledged without judgment. Victor's presence in their lives was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. He listened as Emma's mother shared her perspective, and together they confronted the past, its regrets and its love intertwined. The conversations were not easy. Years of silence and separation had left scars that would take time to heal. Emma found herself becoming more than a nanny or an employee. She was a link between two worlds that had long been kept apart by fear and secrecy. In her growing understanding of Victor and her mother's shared past, she saw the possibility of new beginnings. Returning to the estate, Emma noticed subtle changes. The staff treated her with a newfound respect, sensing the shift in the household's dynamics. Victor, once a distant figure, began to show glimpses of warmth and openness, especially in moments shared quietly with Emma. The children, unaware of the adult complexities around them, continued to bring light and laughter to the mansion. Their innocence was a reminder of what had been lost and what could still be reclaimed. Emma's role evolved naturally. She was no longer merely the caretaker of children, but a guardian of fragile family ties, a witness to the slow rebuilding of trust and connection. The estate, once a place of secrets, began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Through the process, Emma saw her mother in a new light, not just as a parent, but as a woman who had endured pain and made difficult choices out of love. Her mother's strength and vulnerability intertwined, painting a portrait of resilience. Victor, too, revealed layers beneath his stoic exterior. The man who had seemed cold and distant was one shaped by love and loss, haunted by the sacrifices he had made, but hopeful for the future they might still create together. As the days turned into weeks, the family's hidden wounds started to heal. Conversations that had once been impossible became part of their daily lives. Forgiveness, tentative and fragile, began to take root. Emma felt a sense of purpose she had not anticipated. In bridging the gap between her mother and Victor, she was helping to rewrite a story once marked by silence and separation. The past, with all its complexity, was no longer a chain but a foundation. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, a scene once unimaginable, Emma caught a glimpse of the future she had longed for, a family, imperfect but united, facing the uncertainties of life together. The journey was far from over, and challenges remained. But in this moment, hope prevailed, a quiet promise that even the deepest secrets could be faced and that love, in its many forms, was worth fighting for. The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of Emma's room as she sat by the window, a quiet moment of reflection finally settling over her. The past weeks had been a whirlwind, a journey through shadows and silence, revelations and reconciliations. Now, as the morning light touched the worn pages of the letter resting on her lap, Emma felt the weight of everything she'd uncovered begin to transform into something new, understanding, hope, and a fragile peace. Truth, she realized, was not always easy to bear. It demanded courage, the kind that had taken her by surprise when she first found that sealed envelope tucked away in the Langford estate's library. It required the bravery to ask questions, to confront long-held fears, and to sit with discomfort when answers were not what she expected. But in facing those buried family secrets, Emma had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her mother's story, once a closed book filled with silence, had unfolded into a testament of endurance and love. The sacrifices made in the shadows of secrecy had been born from fierce loyalty and protection, not betrayal. And Victor Langford, the enigmatic figure who had seemed so untouchable, revealed himself as a man shaped by both loss and hope, whose choices had been guided not by selfishness, but by a desire to safeguard the family he held dear. Emma's place between these two worlds, her mother's quiet past and Victor's guarded present, had become a bridge, a symbol of the possibility that fractured histories could be mended. It was a role she embraced with unexpected resolve, knowing that healing was a process, fragile and ongoing. As she looked out over the estate's manicured gardens, Emma thought of the children she cared for, whose innocence was a powerful reminder of life's continuity. They were the next chapter, unburdened by old secrets, yet shaped by the legacy of love and silence that preceded them. Emma understood now that the stories we inherit, no matter how complicated, are threads woven into the fabric of who we become. The Langford estate, once a place of mystery and distance, had begun to feel like home, not because the secrets had vanished, but because truth had been allowed to live within its walls. It was a home where honesty, however difficult, was valued above appearances, and where the past was no longer a chain but a foundation for growth. Emma's thoughts turned inward, to her own journey of self-discovery. She had arrived as a stranger, a caretaker with questions she dared not voice. She would stay as something more, a guardian of stories, a witness to transformation, and a keeper of hope. The courage to face the past had opened a door to a future shaped by love, forgiveness, and the willingness to embrace complexity. Her gaze settled on the letter one last time before she folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a secret to hide, but as a reminder of the path she had traveled. The narrative of her family, once fragmented and silent, was now a living story, one that invited both reflection and renewal. Emma rose from her seat and stepped away from the window, the morning light following her into the day ahead. The journey was far from over, but the lessons she had learned were clear, that truth, no matter how painful, holds the power to heal, that love often demands sacrifice, and that the courage to confront the past is the first step toward building a better future. In the quiet of the Langford estate, amidst walls that had witnessed decades of silence, a new chapter was beginning, one written not in secrecy, but in openness, resilience, and hope. Emma knew that this story, like all stories worth telling, was as much about endings as it was about beginnings. And with that knowledge, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.